roll call. Rosie?
Thank you, Sophia. Sophia?
Present.
Kimberly?
Here.
Carmen?
Here.
Lisette? Maribeth?
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Okay, and let's do 1C, Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item 2, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Rosie?
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Carmen. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
4-0. Thank you.
All right, item 3, general business. 3A, approval of CUSD third interim financial report for fiscal year 2022 to 23.
Jesus Contreras, formerly Mr. Contreras, as of last Thursday night, Dr. Contreras. And congratulations to our colleague for finishing his dissertation in less time than it took me. So I have envy and a little regret. But Mr. Dr. Contreras will present tonight on this subject.
Thank you, members of the board and Superintendent Petrich. I bring to you a third interim report. Last year, the year before, I did not bring to you a third interim. There are circumstances that bring our fiscal status to a place, as I will be talking during the presentation, where we are in need of bringing to you a third interim. Before I get started, I would like to remind the board that in a fiscal report, there are three basic elements. One of them is the actual expenditures that we bring to you, first interim, every single thing that has occurred up until October 31st. Second interim, all the activity up to January 31st. And third interim now, it's everything that has occurred up until April 30th. So that's the first element. The second element is that a fiscal report, a financial report, is based on assumptions. So those assumptions are those things that we know based on what our political platform, all the different components that make all of our finances. And the third element is that we are forecasting. We are getting to, based on assumptions, we are to tell you what we think we are going to be ending the fiscal year and 2 other years. So that brings us to be 3 elements that are very important as we look at the financial report. The financial report that I'm bringing to you today, what has happened? We had a May revise that tell us what some elements with which we can forecast. So is it a financial report, a perfect to the penny report? The only thing that is to the penny are the expenditures and the revenue received up until that moment. The rest are projections and assumptions. Projections based on assumptions. So with that in mind, I bring to you the whole notion that back in December, we brought you the activity that was up to October 31st. And that was certified as qualified. Qualified means that we may not be able to meet our responsibilities. One of our responsibilities is to make sure that 3% of our expenditures are considered as a reserve. So that's a very important one that we're going to be calling and talking to you about. In March, I brought to you a second interim report. That second interim report was also qualified. Same concept. Then, the third interim report, if you bring to the board 2 qualified reports, Houston, we have a problem. We need to make sure that, how is it that we're looking up until the activities of April 30th, and how are we going to be moving in the following years? These 3, I usually tell you, in green is what we have, our the 22-23 year, qualified, and this is your third interim. That is what we have right now in front of you, a third interim. The other ones are the previous years. You can, at any given year, you have 3 years coming together. Putting a wrapping up the previous year, going on reports on the current year, and looking into the following year. So, at first interim, we brought to you the notion that the ending balance and 2 years out in 24-25, we might not make our reserve. That was what we brought to you back at first interim. We have a challenge. At second interim, okay, Rosie? Yes. At second interim, we had more challenges. And those things that I circle for you are those that are on the column of unrestricted revenue, unrestricted expenditures. Why don't I circle for you the restricted? Just because of that. They're restricted revenues, that they have to be spent on very specific purposes. So that is what we brought to you. So just bringing you up to memory, those things that we had. First interim, second interim. And one thing that I always want to remind you is what kind of a district we are and who do we serve. This is our current year, and this year we are serving about 2,700 students, 2,700 plus students. Of those students, about a little over 1,000 are what we call the unduplicated students. And unduplicated means that are students who are either foster youth, English learners, or low-income students. Because we serve those students, we calculate in our LCF calculator and what we call the LCAP amount of grant that we're going to be using to do something very specific for those children. That's what Leticia will be bringing, an LCAP, a local control and accountability plan, to make sure that we address the educational needs of those students to the tune of, in our case, about $2.3, $2.4 million that we have to use in our LCAP to serve those students. So, another important thing, you have seen this, declining enrollment. The number of students that we are serving now, we anticipate that they're gonna continue to decline. We have the current years, we have the data from the past years, and the others are projections, the best that we know. the demographic studies that have been brought to the board. So we know whom we serve. We know that we have declining enrollment. Rosie, can you help me move that? We said May revise. May revise brought the whole notion that the state of California, back from January to May, has increased the shortfall. Instead of $22.5 million in January, now the state is looking at $30.5 billion. Level of uncertainties that come in because the state does not really know what's going to be coming in because the tax was deferred. The tax date, April 15, was not tax day this year. It's going to be moved forward, further up in the, so that brings some level of uncertainty. And that uncertainty tells us that 50-50 of our recession starting in 2023 or 24. But there is a commitment from the state of California to say, but we will keep an 8.22% COLA in the LCFF funding. One thing that continues to be is that, but whatever we do, the ELOP, the opportunity programs, the extended learning opportunity programs, is funded as it continues to be funded. The universal meals continues to be funded. But the COLA, to fund the COLA, money had to come from somewhere. So some of the funds that had been given to, or had been proposed in January are being like, okay, we're going to cut those grants. And I had brought to you a couple of grants, big grants, that were going to be, that we were going to be able to tackle so that we could actually help or support our need. So one of them, the Learning Recovery Emergency and the Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials grants, and referring to the grants, not Prop 28. Prop 28 is separate from this grant. So those got cut. We do not know fully what, we just have a percentage of what it is going to be. And then things that now are put in place is okay for CalSTRS, the contribution, the pension contribution is going to be 19.1, and for CalPERS is going to be 26.68. So some of the indicators get settled, and then we start looking at how this is going to look like. So this is just the grounds for uncertain economic indicators that are not really giving us the certainty that we would want. But this delivers us into a third interim that, of course, looks worse than second interim. So what do we see there? We have continued to deficit spend. And that deficit spending is something that we all are looking into. How can we streamline this deficit spending, and how can we remedy this? So things that we have done thus far. Rosie, can you help? Okay. To mitigate some of our fiscal situation, we collaborated, and then let's take stock of the resources that we have, and we looked into journaling, charging some allowable costs to this one-time dollars. So we, Leticia, myself, and we all got together to see what of this is allowable expenditures that are part of our current operation. To use an example of that, we looked into this grant allows for getting a program to support health and mental health. And so we arranged some of the expenditures. This is just an example of things that we are already doing that we could then journal into this one-time dollars. Why? Because we need the respite to be able to get ahead of the game, So we also took a look at all of the leftovers of the federal dollars that we received during the pandemic to also look at the expenditures that we could legally charge to those expenditures. But then nature loved us, and as soon as we were getting some of that, we had trees that were falling, we had things that we needed to spend money on. So there was a moment where I said, okay, didn't we just got 100,000? Here go 100,000 worth of trees to mitigate the storms. So that was this part of what we had. So we got to see, okay, $2.1 million of offsetting should be available for something. But I just wanted to use the trees, for example, and things of the sort that we continue to mitigate. And this is why we have brought to the board the whole notion that healthy reserves helped us weather any of these situations. That's why at the state of California, a 17% reserves are advised so that districts they get to weather any of these things that can happen without really affecting the operation of the regular operation. So just reserves serve this purpose to help us do that. Okay, so Rosie, this is just an example also of I had asked you, I came to you and I said, looks like we're going to be getting a music, arts, music, instructional materials, discretionary block. It looks like we're going to be getting $1.7 million. And then there came the first cut and said, of that, it looks like we're going to be getting about 30% of that. And I gave you these scenarios. I'm just using it. Said, if we get $1.7 million, we can continue our VAPA expenditures, and we can have the math adoption, and we can have the science adoption, and let me pay healthcare and other allowable costs out of that. And you said, yes, you authorized me to do that. So I said, but it might be less. Let me do, if it only comes to be $1.1 million, this is how it would look like. And you told me, okay, do it. Well, May revised, it's bringing, say, like, no, it's not going to be $1.7 million. We think that it is going to be $863K. And we don't know yet. So it is not money that that's exactly what it's going to be. So in my earlier slide, I was telling you the uncertainties through which we have to make sense of our fiscal situation. So because of that, because of what I showed you, how the third interim looks like, our expenditures are real, the assumptions are assumptions, and what we see into the future are those numbers that I shared with you. Rosie, can you help me? What did we use? We used the same standards. We get the Department of Finance, we get the Department of Education, we follow the FICMAT, we get to work with the San Mateo County Office of Education, which is our fiscal agent, and they have the responsibility in the AB 1200 to monitor that solvency of all the districts. With that, and knowing that I already said, declining enrollment, our deficit spending, and we are bringing this to you as a negative certification. We will continue to work and take whatever measures we need to take so that we can get out of where we are. Now, in the middle of this, Superintendent got the notion, and I got notion that, wait a minute, you might get a few more dollars. You might get a few more dollars. Why? Well, because if you compared the actual dollars that we got in for 21-22 and what you might be getting for the current year, it might be $1.9 million more. But those are not dollars that we have anywhere. Might. When will we know that? Sometime in August. In the meantime, by statute, in June 22nd, I will be bringing to you a budget for 23-24 with the assumptions that with what we know then. Will we know by June 22nd if those dollars are true? We won't. We will know that until later. So that is the level of uncertainties through which we get some decisions made, and the notion of the dollars that we bring to you. When is the only time that we bring to you that this is exactly what happened? That is when we bring to you in September, this is how we close the books. Those are real expenditures and real what happened the previous year. The budget that we will bring to you for consideration of approval will have considerations and what we know as of right now. That is why, at first interim, things would have looked somewhat different. But the only thing that it is real is whatever expenditures and whatever activity we have to the moment that that particular fiscal report is. So I am asking that the board for certification of a third interim that we have to submit by June 1st, by statute, by June 1st, to the San Mateo County Office of Education. They have their AB 1200 responsibility of monitor solvency of all the districts in the county. So that is why I asked for a special meeting, and thank you for having this special meeting for me to bring you this reality.
I just want to say it was not a choice that we had. Dr. Contreras didn't want to bring this to us. This puts us right back where we were 4 years ago. When I joined the district, I remember that last conversation, or first conversation I had with Jane Euster and this chief business officer at the time. And they said, oh, you might have to do some things with the county. That's where we are again. Like it or don't like it, those are the facts. Those are the facts that San Mateo County Office of Education agrees with. That is the revenue that we get. We had rosy projections last year for taxes that did not come in. Our projections came in high. We came out of mediation and resolved employee raises across the board to all employees, about 5.29 or just a little over 5%, and over a total of 3 years, over 11% plus a $2,000 bonus. And where you have it simply put is that we overspent. Our projections were higher than expected, or were higher than, how do I put that? Our projections were calculated higher than they actually came in. And thus we're in the red. We were in the red for the first interim. We were in the red for the second interim. Now we're even more in the red. You have declining enrollment, you have deficit spending, and you have the shell game of the California state budget. I was just last week in a conversation where we were talking about this arts instructional materials block grant. They have stolen from that money, that one-time money, to fund a COLA. But even if you look at a COLA, it doesn't cut the mustard for what we have. Currently, we're in the red. So we have to bring a recommendation to the county, and it is a negative, not a qualified recommendation. And I'm sorry that it is the case, but it is the case. And nobody's to fault. Projections were higher than actually came in. And it doesn't help us that now everybody's taxes will be coming in later. I saw a headline in the Half Moon Bay Review, I think a week or two again, saying that taxes will come in 4% higher. I don't think this board or this district should, or I, will make the mistake again of counting our chickens before they're hatched. So it was a rosy outlook last year, 6.55% on the assessment tracker, came in under our 2% projection. So that's where we are.
But just to see the horizon, and if this comes through, 6.88 from last year's to this year remains to be seen, but it's probable. But will that help us get out of the everything? No, because we need to really tackle our deficit spending.
I just want to interject again because I can, because it seems to be my privilege in this role. And so I apologize if I'm explaining in the way I do. There's been a lot of talk about, hey, we need to give raises to our employees. The county office would not take our AB 1200. This is not the first time I've said this. The county office would not take an AB 1200 form as it currently sits with a negative budget until we could show all the cuts we could make that would be allowed for ongoing money. It wouldn't happen. And what I predict is going to happen is we're going to be back where we were 4 years ago in the fall, proposing cuts, difficult cuts, personnel, cuts to personnel. As we have fewer students, we need fewer personnel. There's that. Teachers will continue to be assigned contractually, efficiently, as much as we can, per the contractual class size limits. Usually these cuts come to CSEA employees, honestly. So there will be cuts ahead. There's no other way to balance the budget. But I just want to disabuse anyone of the notion we didn't create this scenario. We don't like this scenario. We gave last year as much as we could, more than we could. I wish we could do it again. But for those who think we should be spending money on employees, that won't begin to come until we have a clean book of health, until we know that we have a budget that's in the positive and not qualified or negative for 3 out years, according to San Mateo County Office of Education's calculation. And even if I was to recommend it to the board, the county office would reject it and say, we do not have a plan for Assembly Bill 1200 so that we would be able to provide it. The board is not trying to do this to anybody. Staff are not trying to do this to anybody. The money's not there.
Any questions from the board?
We have one public comment, so I'm going to call our person from public, Kathleen Wall, to the podium. So usual typical rules, 3 minutes. And then it's the only one. And so then we will then go in motion to approve, second vote, and then questions. So we'll get to the questions in a few minutes. So come on up, yeah. No, sorry.
Oh, that's undemocratic. Okay, good evening, governing board members and district admin. My name is Kathleen Wall, and I'd like to make a few comments regarding the proposed negative certification of the third interim projections. So since the 1920 academic year, the community has heard that CUSD is on the brink of financial disaster. Finally, it's here with a negative certification proposal. CUTA is puzzled about the situation. We have not yet received the DAT file from the district to do our own fiscal analysis, but I did spend Saturday night scrolling through your actuals data. This year, the district has received more than ever before, $46.8 million per the third interim CUSD report, page 10. Last year, the district's revenues were $43.1 million. So this is about $3.7 million more in revenue than you brought in last year. On top of that, the district expected $43 million in total revenue per your 22-23 budget published in September. So you got $3.8 million more than you budgeted in the year. Budgeted expenditures. The district budgeted for $44 million in expenditures, and the third interim shows the district projecting to spend $47 million in spending $47 million. And this amount is $3.2 million beyond your budget. For many years now, the central office has been warning of a fiscal crisis, yet revenues have increased every year. In 2019-20, when we were first warned of financial disasters, the revenues were $39.2 million. For this year, 22-23, the revenues are $46.8 million by your own numbers. This amount is over $7.6 million more, and this is almost a 20% increase in dollars in the last 4 years. When you look at your interim reports, your breakdown is not broken down by spending categories. You need to dig through the numbers of the actuals by object code to find out what each person was paid. So like you see certificated salaries, but that's a combination of admin and teacher salaries. So teacher salaries are $200,000 below the amount you budgeted for in September. Admin salaries are $640,000 more than over the budget. So we feel like we're not the reason the district is in this financial situation. You're definitely not overpaying us. In fact, you've paid about $650,000 fewer dollars towards teachers. Last thing, just give me a minute. School districts exist to educate students, and teachers educate students, so you need us. Teacher salaries need to be prioritized in the budget because we are the core program. So these positions should be budget priorities. We think it's good that the county has a financial expert to aid the district. We need to support our students. After much thought, we've met. CUTA believes that because of the inability to attract and retain teachers, especially to high school positions, the governing board should consider asking San Mateo Union High School District to take over Half Moon Bay High School. You cannot keep teachers up there. You're on a curve like this. Maybe the county office could help you facilitate this takeover. And as always, I'm happy to share CUTA's fiscal analysis with any community or board member. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Do we have a second? I'll second.
Thank you, Lizette, and thank you, Carmen.
Yes, and we'll vote afterwards at the end. Okay, questions and comments for Jesus? Worsham.
Thank you for your presentation, Jesus. Could you describe what can those restricted funds be used for? What are?
Each of the pots has its own allowable uses.
Okay.
And the VAPA, the arts and the instructional materials, and allowed for administrative costs, including health and welfare, and that's what I what I used them for.
Okay.
I can send you the statute, I can send you the
No,
full list.
I'm just trying to understand when I'm looking 3 years out in the red to understand what the, just kind of notionally, some narrative of,
So each grant that we had this year had a list of allowable expenditures and different timelines, like the arts and music, it's 25 up to 26, up to year 26. The other one, it was up to 2028. So each one has its own rules.
and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we talk about maybe 2 months ago, some of the salaries we have came in from other grant funding? I mean, for administrators?
Correct. That is correct. The grant.
No, it's not permanent funding, but that's how we've been able to, that
Right.
wasn't available for classroom.
Either grant funded or it is part of the LCAP goals, one of the two. But if you may consider, even though it's general fund, the LCAP funds that $2 million are for specific purposes. So you might as well treat them as categorical, even though they're not categorical. So in that respect, if there are some positions that are doing something very specific to support our students who are educationally disadvantaged, those are the services that are charged out of the LCAP. It's not categorical, but we treat them as categorical.
But even if you took that whole restricted and subtracted it from the unrestricted, we're still in the red 3 years out.
Correct.
I just want to ring the bell again to remind everybody the work that was done over spring break, which we've mentioned at 2 board meetings, I think, that we've had since, maybe was it spring break, was exactly that, was to journal expenses for administrators to allowable costs for categorical dollars.
I just want to say first, congratulations, Jesus. I had likened last time the school district budgeting process to cancer drug development, which was a specific reference to my past life. And I just want to say I'm glad the doctor's in the house.
Thank you.
Not that there's anything funny about this, but in all honesty, I've also personally spent countless hours studying this with an eye to how do we make this, work, knowing the complexities, knowing the pitfalls, knowing our reason for existence is for our students of our community, including those who have historically been underserved, and making sure that we have the staff to support that. So I think that we're all in on that shared goal. So I think that's really important. I have a lot of questions, so get comfortable there. So again, going back to, I think the key slide there is number 13 in the packet or number 10 in the slide deck, where you have the third interim, the colorful slide that we have grown to be very familiar with. And so the most important number to me on this slide, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the bottom right-hand circle, which is the forecast for the year 2025-26, which is showing a deficit of $7.8 million.
That is correct. If nothing changes and we keep the same assumptions, that is what it would be.
And even this year, we're at negative almost $1 million, $750,000.
We would not be making our reserve, but required 3% reserve by that number.
For this school year, which ends on,
June 30th.
yeah, like in a month. Okay. So maybe someone will write us a check for $700,000, because that's like the initial danger zone, I guess, right there. And then in next year, we flip back to basic aid. And I know in the past you've said that because of the flipping, because I don't want people to lose sight of that, when we flip to basic aid, I know in the past we've typically gotten a bump because of the way that LCFF works of around $2 million.
Around $2 million.
Is that the assumption in this budget as well?
That assumption is there. That is why the following year is not as big
Yeah.
as on the third year out.
So that's why it jumps up in the third year on this table. And I just want to highlight that as a risk as well, because if for whatever reason of the ratio of dollars to students changes, and we say we don't flip back to basic aid next year, that's minus $2 million on this table,
If we don't,
minus $9.8 million.
if we don't flip back to basic aid, we will be paid only on the amount of students that we get.
Do you think there's a chance of that?
Well, and we've had, sorry, you answered that, but we've
No.
had that, yeah, we've, not likely, but we've had cases where we had expectations about what status will be, and it ended up different.
Based on what we know now, we're pretty confident that we will flip back to basic aid. And the reason why we became a LCFF district this year is because that was, the state put those 13.6% to all of the LCFF districts, which to a district like ours, it puts us right there.
Can I just follow up because we're talking about it?
Sure.
That 2 million supplemental, like how confident are you in that 2 million? I mean, could it be?
1.9, 1 point,
Okay, but you don't think it's gonna be 1 million or something? Or-
We
the
have-
assumption is that it is going to be
We don't know.
around 2 million. And that is built with a 2 million assumption, that is,
That you feel pretty good about?
I feel pretty strong about that it's going to be around 2
80%
million.
likely to happen. No, she wants a number.
Remember that I talk about uncertainties?
Well,
Confidence
if you
interval.
said you thought it could
Yeah.
be a lot, you know, a million, that really concerns me. But
We can,
it could be more,
it could be more,
but
but we can only go by the statistics of the past to get a trend.
so it's been pretty
our best.
consistent that that would be
Yeah,
a
that-
reasonable number.
that is reasonable to expect that number to be that.
Okay, so then going back to that 7.8 million, because that's the horizon that we have to plan for in order to maintain by state law fiscal solvency. So we don't get, our friends at the county coming and telling us what to do, which we don't want to do, have happen. Because that probably wouldn't be the best thing for our students. And so when we have a number that out of whack, I mean, $7.8 million is a vastly larger number than we had 4 years ago, right? And it is because of a pretty different expectation of revenue and a pretty different situation at the state level, which impacted the $1 million in cuts to that AMIM grant alone since the first time that you showed it to us, plus or minus maybe 800,000 on this one, but I think that's cut down from more in the initial estimate for that grant before. And a lot of other reasons, right? So basically, expenses are going up, revenues are going down. That gap just gets bigger and bigger, especially when your expenses going up are based on ongoing expenses on one-time funding, like your reserves, which you pointed out as well. And I think that can't be emphasized enough, that this isn't normal in the state, to be operating on 5 cents in your pocket. And I think about this budget, it does seem complex, but really it comes down to a very simple term, if you think about it as a household, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Jesus, but I think if this is my house, my home, my bank account has minus $700,000 in it right now, today, because it's, this is pretty close to actual, given we're a month away from closing the books. And then I'm doing some calculations to say my rent is this amount, my income is this amount next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. And that means I'm gonna be, my credit card's 7.8 million, because that's the only way I'm gonna be able to pay, right, for cash flow. My family will be in debt that much. And this is our family, right? So I think this is kind of a big family with money coming in for different things, going out to different things. This is red in our bank account.
One thing I would like to remind us all is that budgets are not linear numbers. Sometimes you take, so what am I going to do about it? When you do something about it and you go into your own home and say, I'm going to cut cable, whatever, and that's an amount. That amount behaves not linearly, it behaves exponentially. So all of a sudden, something that you do here is not going to take you $20 less and less, but it has a different behavior. So the same thing with this. We don't expect linearity to be the ruling here, but rather what these measures that I will take will help us get to a better place soon. Now, this is the scenario if we do nothing. If we do nothing and we continue spending the way that we're spending. But if we take measures, and that's what Dr. McPetrich was referring to, what that's going to look like, that is something that at the budget advisory that some of you have been at, that's where we start kicking things around, that we bring to the board as a result of those. That's the way that we proceed to think of the what.
So the sooner we make cuts, the better it'll be in the end.
Well, the county will probably request of us, after getting the third interim and the negative certification, then we'll be back on that, where the county will be assigning fiscal experts, including their staff. FICMAT will be called, and we will need to probably, I'm imagining, bring you a resolution in December of this year identifying the cuts we will be able to make to address the shortfalls we have. I do think at that time you'll have a better picture of what the tax proceeds are. You'll have a better picture of what the shell game of California's January governor budget may revise, arm wrestling with the legislature through the summer holds. So yeah, the next fall I think is an exercise for us again in identifying cuts to be able to get to a place where we are at least qualified, if not positive.
I have a question about the STRS and PERS. You put the 22, 23 figure in there. Is that the same or different from the last couple of years?
It has 2 years ago, the state helped with that and it went down and it helped. Now it's back to where it would be, and it will continue to go. Like of the next 2 years, it will be up to 28 for CalPERS, and CalSTRS would stay at 19 point.
To that point, Kim, if Ms. Hines, if you'll remember, the Public Employee Pension Reform Act took place, I want to say, in 2012, 2013, and that redefined pensions that employees receive, whether it be teachers through state teachers retirement system, or administrators through state teachers retirement system, or CSEA employees and unrepresented employees through the PERS, public employee retirement system, and these numbers have escalated over time. And you've heard me speak about this in the past, that this is an increasing cost. We did get some relief a couple of years ago because of COVID-19, and they stretched out that horizon, but I believe the horizon is by 2025, and more or less that would be up at that number. And so I just want to point out too that I was speaking with somebody over the weekend actually about their solar plan and NEMS 2.0, and they were saying, oh, I'm just so glad I got in under the wire because between January and September of this year alone, PG&E rates would have increased 30%. That is kind of like the thing that when we talk about the budget being like a house budget, it is about kids' shoes, and it is about dinners out with the family, but it is also about keeping the lights on, and it is about the pensions in the family. So there are pension costs that continue to increase for us and will continue to increase for us over time.
I'm just trying to think through. So when we actually were able to give raises a couple of years ago, it was at a point when that had dropped down, whether it's artificial or not. I mean, it varies. is my point. So is that those rates then factored on top of the salary schedule? Is that how it's collected?
There is salary, there's nominal salary, then those percentages on top of that. So an employee who is making 100K, you can count on spending 130 for that employee when you account.
No,
for it.
I understand there's other benefits, but I'm just saying this one number because I know it was an issue a couple of years ago and that we felt relieved when it went down. So I'm just didn't have in my head where it had been the last couple of years now that we're looking at this.
Every year, California School Boards Association, Association of California School Administrators, advocates with regard to educational funding, advocate to the state, hey, give us some relief on this. Public Employee Pension Reform Act increase to pension costs to districts. I've said this many a time, I'll say it again too. It hurts all the employees too because they're contributing also in a way that they never did before 2012, 2013. The state took that away and said, oh, all of a sudden you like that pension, the district's gonna have to pay for it. So this is part of the story. Legislators will tell you we've funded public education more than ever in the past 4 or 5 years, but the costs have increased, whether it's for utilities, pension costs, health costs, insurance costs. These numbers do go up, and it is a drain on us. And so when you also hear that kind of talk about, well, you get a COLA, everybody should just get that as a raise. Well, the COLA doesn't even begin to cover our costs. And that's why you continue to see us in the red, even with the COLA. Has nothing to do with the state budget, has nothing to do with the state promises, has everything to do with what's on that sheet. It's math.
So can I ask a question then? Jesus, I just am very, very clear. So over the next 3 years, we will be accumulating a $7.8 million, we expect to be accumulating a $7.8 million budget deficit.
If we
And
do nothing.
if we make no changes, so we have to make some changes to either increase our revenues and or cut our costs
Correct.
before we can have any future spending. That's like, we're gonna have, even without any future spending, I should say,
I just want
or
to,
additional spending.
I'm so happy you just said that, and I'm just going to say it. There is an opportunity for the board ahead to increase local revenues. And that is one thing. As the board continues to advocate, as I continue to speak with legislators about how unfair the funding is, whether it's Mid-Coast Council representatives or Half Moon Bay City Council representatives or Senator Becker, Assemblymember Berman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We keep talking about this, but locally, there is a way to increase your funding locally. The board could do that in the future with a parcel tax, with an increased parcel tax.
Okay, yes, and that was kind of what I was thinking in terms of like, we have revenue streams that don't increase at 8%. Like only a few of them are being considered 8%. Others are not increasing at 8%. Meanwhile, our overall expenses are increasing at a higher rate because there's so many different categories of them. I feel like we have a lot of, I would be curious to understand a little bit better the point that was raised earlier about like the spend and the actual spend versus the budget, to know like a little bit about the rationale. I appreciate Kim's point. I suspect that's part of, at least a big part of it, because there's more grant funding available. And so of course, that's why we always want to look at the unrestricted funding. It's misleading to look at numbers like in around $50 million, because a lot of that is like the $7 to $10 million we were getting per year for COVID pandemic relief, which was like the bump that now is running out. Like you can see that pretty clearly when you look at the colorful chart, how the restricted funding is going back down from like 13 point something to like 9 point something. Like that's $4 million that's being spent right now that can't be spent in the future because it's based on one-time funding.
That's why I make my circles on the leftmost
On the
column.
unrestricted,
on
that's
the
what we need to look at.
unrestricted.
The restricted is just like, it's for specific things, it's not for general use. And it fluctuates based on, it's mostly some kind of grants or LCF, the LCAP money. But the LCAP money is not officially included in there, right? It's officially included as unrestricted because it technically.
It's unrestricted.
It's legally
unrestricted.
unrestricted, although that's like kind of a legal oddity because it really is restricted for use. They just don't track it, I guess, as closely. Maybe?
That's
Yeah.
why you saw a couple of years ago, now you're gonna
I
be
remember those
doing
reports.
carryover of what you don't spend, because in the past you would keep those in general fund. And now it really gave it the notion of categorical.
And can you remind us, Jesus, what portion of our budget goes towards staff? Like employees?
That full employees in a regular district, all employees, it's about an 65 to 85 to 90%, depending.
Because I remember at one point, a few years ago, when you first came, we were like 87% at one point. So it might fluctuate year over year, but I would just like to put out there that to be making, so my next main big point was going to be the next couple of months, 6 months are going to be really hard.
Well, the next 6 months we'll be trying to adjust to the new reality, which, look, I'm still wearing a mask, as everybody knows. I have a wife who works in medical care, so I try to put a mask on when the room is big and bring it up and bring it down. But a lot of the world considers us in this post-COVID reality, and they are starting to pull that funding back away from us. And so the next 6 months of us is about adjusting to that reality and that lack of funding. And so you will see some drop in services and programs, likely because of that drop, and also connecting to what you and Ms. Hines have been talking about. You would have seen an increase in staff, particularly for restricted dollar purposes that were intended to be used for particular programs and services, whether that's extended learning opportunities, which is an ongoing grant and a signature of the governor and the legislature, or mental wellness and health, or medical health. So I can imagine that you will see some of those costs already being journaled into funds that where we could put that to save money from the general fund, but you may see very well cuts being made in those regards because it's going to be required.
Well, and I think that's important, and I also would be curious to understand better, like, how we're spending money on our staff as well, because we have a fairly complex workforce structure of CSEA employees, CUTA employees, administrators, and administrators and other non-represented or unrepresented staff, right? And I think we hear a lot of like numbers getting plucked out and assumptions about even like Kim, when you refer to salary schedule, we need to think about compensation, not just salaries. And I can say this, having done a very quick back of the envelope analysis on Transparent California, which I appreciate because it kind of like simplifies a lot of compensation stuff. And just looking at that, I see our teachers who we know and love and deserve so much, like a good chunk of our staff, teaching staff, is above the salary schedule. And I need to understand that better. And I suppose it is because of stipends and like overtime and things like that. Like, but I don't really know. Like, I think that's important to understand. Like, when we have early career educators, like on the very, working super hard because it's like their first 5 years and they're, still getting kind of like the hang of the role. Like in the beginning, in $60,000 kind of range, but then we have some teachers earning more than some administrators. Like, I don't understand that, so I'm curious to learn more.
Stipends, I think stipends are useful because it allows the work to be done without another full FTE. I mean, or you end up with hiring extra people
And I'm not saying
to
that they're
take
not
care of all
useful.
those
Yeah,
things.
I'm just saying I
Yeah.
have no idea how much we're spending and what, let's say, for example, for stipends. That's just one example.
Let me jump in and just say that at the beginning of the year, we will take pains to have a staffing update to talk about who's staffed where. We've done this in the past. We can do it again. It's simple to have an org chart brought, and we can make that very transparent to the board and the public. You will, to the point about seeing on Transparent California some staff members who may be making more than, what the contract salary schedule would suggest. Part of this is going to be stipends. Part of it is because you're folding in health and pension benefits.
Without that.
Without that, and then part of it may be also that for teachers, for example, or administrators, for example, who work during the summer, and then all of a sudden they're quasi, just like we would have 220-day work years, all of a sudden, if you have someone who's got a 185-day work year, now they're at 220,
And I think that
225
makes
day.
sense. I think that makes sense for all those reasons. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. I'm just saying it's kind of a black box where that staff money is going. And I know it's in the SACS reports to some extent with some slices, but having a more qualitative conversation about, even making sure the schools are appropriately resourced for their student populations. And I know that's a conversation we had back when we changed the enrollment boundaries for Moonridge a couple years ago to say, making sure if we need more staffing at one school because now they have more kids with more needs, like even aligning those needs, I'd be curious to learn more about it.
We will definitely bring a breakdown of this in the fall so we can show staffing. We hear a lot of comments about how we are not able to hire or the recruitment and retention. Certainly that will, put a pin in that and tell you where we are in that place and time. There's always hiring we do in the summer. We have been able to make some good hires already for vacancies. Both at the high school and at other schools, at the Hatch Elementary, et cetera, et cetera. So we will bring that in the fall for sure. And I think it will be important for Dr. Contreras to work with Dr. Bhatia and with our HR director, Bianca Forster, to sort of play that out and say, well, this is how your money is spent. Because it's mostly staffing.
We'll do that.
So one question I would have, and thank you, Sean, I think that will help to see if we have like a full picture of how the different campuses are staffed, how the DO is staffed. I think what would also be helpful, and I respect that in California, there is a high overhead in regulation and reporting to the county, to the state, and this is not an easy budget or process to keep track of. I get that. And understanding that overhead, knowing we've got declining enrollment, is there any way we can show a comparison so we understand what the optimal levels of the overall, the administration side of it? So where do we look to be able to compare to show, so then we're not spitballing assumptions. If the public asks us questions, we can answer a little more forthright.
No, I appreciate that. I think it is for accountability purposes and transparency and to be honest, brokers, I think it would make sense for you to see that. The calculation that was done according to the Sabre and Katie reports, from what I've been told by staff, is that we are in line with the cohort of other districts with regard to administrative costs. But certainly our administrative costs have gone up in part because of the creation of new assignments, because of categorical dollars that have come to us as grants that we had to hire people to do those jobs. I do think you're going to see, like I said before, you're going to see belt tightening or trimming and cutting, all these metaphors, in the future, and it will not be, we will make sure to bring you also per school site the class sizes so that we, the contract, CUTA contract spells out our contractual class sizes. It's mostly in accordance and in line with the state. And so we will be able to bring that and show our work. We can show every teacher at every school and what their class sizes are. The high school is always very challenging. I appreciate the comment that was made earlier. The high school is always challenging because you have a huge program there, a comprehensive program, great number of advanced placement classes, great athletics program. It costs more than running an elementary school. Elementary school, quite frankly, is pretty easy to staff. It's, 25 to 1 until it's 32 to 1. At the high school, it's far different, but we will bring that at the intermediate school and the high school. I will just say too that I've heard over recent weeks people talking about, well, why are we cutting staff? Well, because we're trying to be efficient and because there's a contractual class size limit. But to your point, Ms. Hines, I think it is important for us to use the Sabre and Katie reports and say this is how other districts are staffed. And you know, the board has part of its purview is approval of the budget, what you're doing tonight, but also organization of the district. And we will be bringing cuts because that's what I did 3.5 years ago when we brought a resolution and said, these are cuts and savings we will make. There will be more of that. But I think before you can make that, I think you will want to know, well, I mean, we've heard from the county too, you can't, you know, cut too much because then you can't run. You have to have a teacher in a classroom. You can't be over contract, but the rest of it is, it's a fuel mix, right? And to keep the machine running, I think you probably want to know, you know, are we running unleaded or leaded or, now I've taken that metaphor too far. But no, certainly in the fall, we'd be happy to bring you an accounting of district office, of teaching staff, support staff, et cetera, and then give you a comparison. We can do those numbers easily with the Sabre and Katie reports that are provided to us by School Services of California.
Also related, because I think that was a good point that Kim raised. Sorry, I'll come in closer. I know that there are state maximum ratios for administrators to teachers, and I don't remember off the top of my head what those are, but it would be helpful to have in that report our ratios and how they jive with that. I know that there is a bill in the legislature right now, who knows where it'll go, to exempt small school districts from that cap for the reasons that you suggested, Sean, like at some, and Kim as well, like you have overhead as a school district and like you still have to fill in all the same reports. Like you're doing an LCAP, you're doing all this stuff, like we get a lot of requests for stuff for the district staff to do, and that's great, but like it's in some ways not as efficient when you're so small. So there has been a bill to exempt, and it's the majority of school districts in,
That doesn't,
it's not looking very good.
no, it doesn't, it won't affect us. We're too
It won't,
big.
no, I know.
Okay.
But I'm saying it's the principle, we're barely too big. So like, although we wouldn't be impacted because that's a small school district is defined as 2,500 or less students, and we're like 2,800. And it's not like, I'm guessing there's enough resistance to it, it probably won't pass anyway. That's my guess. But the point being that there's enough of a movement at the state level, recognizing exactly the point that Kim raised about you've just got to do some stuff no matter what you're, just by being a school district, you've got to update your board policies, right? If you have 50 kids or about 50,000 kids, you're doing a lot of the same stuff. So I want to say it's recognized like beyond
Right,
us.
but then what are the question, when we look at cuts, you know, could we have options? Is it a matter about cutting single bodies, or are there creative ways to meet those needs with like growing teachers with stipends, teachers that want to become administrators later? I mean, I know that on campuses in the past, you had someone acting like a vice principal or, anyway, I'm just looking at some of those creative ways that maybe it's not, when we're in that gray area, how can we staff thoughtfully to maximize, you know, the investments in supporting teachers in the classroom and just manage all of those state craziness. It's just a thought.
I just want to, we've actually talked about this, I think, in a board meeting before. There is an aspect of, it's great when you have teacher leaders. David Jones is a great example of this at the high school. And there are numerous examples, but that's a particularly good example. And we could fund that with particular grants, right? But there is also an aspect where administrators need administrative credentials if they are to do supervision of staff, evaluation, coaching of staff, that's required by the Department of Education for their supervision and their evaluation. And it is also true that you need administrators for discipline. And at the high school, you're never going to be, I mean, look, we staffed up at Cunha Intermediate and at Half Moon Bay High School this year because of concerns in the past about school climate and culture at both schools. And it is a full-time job for those administrators, whether it's the investigation of the situation last week where the bomb threat got called in, and that we'd done a lot of work on that before and had ruled it out, but then it came in again and we wanted to do that. There is an aspect where you need administrators. You can't function without some administrators. The other thing I would say, to Sophia's point, I think is important, is if you look at Dr. Bhatia and the work she's done with colleagues, they've brought in a great amount of grant funding this year. Thank you very much. So I've asked, so I'm close to $1 million. No, that's good, Dr. Bhatia. And I always tell Dr. Bhatia, this needs to be known. So I've asked her and her team to compile a list, hopefully at the end of the school year, where you can see whether it's the community schools or the early college or the CCAP support or summer school, or, I mean, there's just tons of work that is required to bring money into the district. If you don't have staff to apply for those dollars, now you have a different problem.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you're saying. I just to finish the thought, would be when we do a report of all of the districts, if we can understand what teachers, have already gone the extra mile and have that administrative credential. Maybe they don't want to be a full-time administrator, but if someone else has that credential, maybe that's resources that you can tap into. So
Well,
it's just begging the question.
No, we do currently. I mean, I will just say the teacher leader that we have up at Kings Mountain, Debbie Silvera, God bless her, because the site is so small, they haven't had their own principal for some time. They did previous to me, I guess they did. But it was considered, well, there's only 50 students. So we have Martha Ladd assigned to support there. Leticia, Dr. Bhatia also supports there. And at the end of the day, remember, as soon as we turn a teacher into an administrator, then we are paying that administrative cost because, again, remember, it's not so much that administrators make so much, it's that they work more days. There is that. Some of us, make more than others, but.
I would just like to kind of piggyback off something Mary Beth said last time, which was kind of like we're in cut mode, and so start thinking about cuts that we can make, and just kind of having a call to action to everybody for that. I just love to add to that and say, rather than pointing around us and saying, "Hey, cut that," it's like, what can I cut that I'm doing, and maybe I can have a conversation as an employee with my management to say, I'm spending a lot of time on this. Is this really helpful? Like, do you think it's really helpful?
Like cut the service, not the person.
Yeah, to
What
say, I'm spending a
service?
lot of time moving these bottles every day, right? Like, do you really need me to do this? Like, for anyone on the school site, that would most likely be their principal. To anyone in the district office, that would be like their direct manager, ultimately Jesus or Leticia or Bianca or Sean. And to just like kind of think about our own selves rather than pointing to each other and saying, I don't know why she keeps buying these bottles. Like, right? Like, that's not helpful. But to say, maybe I don't need this plastic water bottle, but like maybe it's more about ourselves and how we each could be efficient, but not just to stop doing it, but to talk with our management and just to start thinking about those ideas. If we can get some creative ideas from within our organization, I think that could be helpful. I mean, Shaw, what do you think?
No, and it is something that we do have managers looking at. I'll give you an example. Stig Lin, Director of Technology, will be presenting at the next board meeting to talk about things that we are looking at to save dollars. Will it be different operations? Yes. The way that we've made some moves in technology in particular over the years, the change of the copy system, the change of the phone system, going to electronic documents with informed K-12. Over time, this is more efficient, and the new student information system, which thank heavens you all approve because School Loop is about to go bankrupt at the end of the year. So there are ways that each department manager will be asked. I mean, I got to tell you, that's sort of the thing that I keep reminding leaders in district office of is, okay, where's your 10%? I mean, that's what, Dr. Contreras will want to use a scalpel and not like a big machete like me, but at some point, I'm gonna say, hey, what's the 10%? There'll be some broad strokes and some blunt cuts that I'll ask, and then Dr. Contreras, working with the budget committee and with other leaders in the district, Dr. Bhatia in particular, then we'll start to look at how do we make cuts where we have, added extras in the past.
And just to add to that, I mean, are there programs we have being underutilized by students? Your job is one thing, but also, like, is there a program being underutilized? And I would love if our employees came forward if they see things like that.
Well, I mean,
I'm sorry.
No,
At
please, Dr.
Cabinet,
Contreras.
I referred to this, we need to optimize our resources. So it's an optimization process that will result in.
look, part of this will hit home outside of how it impacts employees to how it impacts students. I always say that this is the job, is to balance the programs and services we provide to students and families with the needs of the employees to provide those services. We've made a commitment in the past with our parent-teacher organizations last year, for example, to make some equity moves. One was, hey, we're gonna have art in action at all our schools. Hey, we're gonna have Heal Project at all our schools. They were minimal expenses, minimal investments. But we felt that that was important, that all kids got those programs and services. But let's take the high school, for example. Constant battle in unified districts and high school districts is, what is the right number to offer an advanced placement course? Well, to any parent or any student who is enrolled in that AP class and ready to take that AP class, and then you say, hey, there's only 15 people gonna take it, and the class size is 35, we're not gonna offer it, that is a difficult conversation. But we may be looking at pulling back on advanced placement services. We may be looking at,
All I have to say is concurrent enrollment.
well, concurrent enrollment, the beautiful thing about...
Solution.
Yeah, no, that's right. The beautiful thing about concurrent enrollment and the CCAP agreement was that it allowed us to provide, and it will allow us over time, depending on how it builds and matures, an opportunity to offer courses that ostensibly we don't pay for.
Yeah, but beyond that, concurrent, not dual enrollment.
Oh, concurrent enrollment. And it works for some students and it doesn't work for other students. But yes, for dual enrollment, we will also look at the CCAP agreement and being able to offer sections on the high school campus. And for that matter, we also have a grant in to see if we can get some money to build more dual enrollment pathway at Pilarcitos and at Half Moon Bay High School. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah, you've got to sort of invest money to make grants to save money. That's part of the irony. But it's well worth it. If you have an employee that's putting in, 5 grants and making $500,000 in a year, it pays for their services.
Can I just add one quick comment about concurrent enrollment, very quickly, which is that it should get a little bit easier with the new site that CSM is putting downtown Half Moon Bay.
I would think so. And
I think it's opening this summer.
And Jennifer Taylor Mendoza has been a fantastic partner as the
They've been
College of
amazing.
San Mateo president. And they're trying to increase the number of college courses. And they've been in sort of talks too with Pilarcitos High School as well as Half Moon Bay High School. And they've also been in talks with La Costa Adult School.
Yeah, and so to that point, I think that's kind of a little bit what I took from what Kim said too, of like, without specifics, but let's just get open-minded and let's get creative about what our students need the most. And I'm glad that you really centered that, Sean, on students. It's like, and that was my call to action would be like, let's challenge what we're doing and how we're doing it and think about constantly retooling what we're doing to meet students' needs better than we have in the past, more cost effectively. Like, we don't have a choice, so we have to do it. It could either be difficult or it could be extremely difficult. I would hope that it can be just only difficult. But to think about these things and just be aware of these opportunities and to think, how do we get, AP's kind of the old model, because it existed like even before I was a kid, to get your foot in the door of college, right? And it was expensive and it was risky because not everyone accepts it. But we have opportunities now with community colleges that did not exist before, and they are dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment as a start. Closer partnerships, just more qualitatively as well. So I think that's, the more we can kind of like not think so much about what have we been doing for 30 years. I'm almost done.
I'm just going to be.
But it's just about the concurrent enrollment. But then to think about what are we trying to do and what are some new ways that we can do it that not only could be more efficient for the health of our organization, which is absolutely necessary to meet the new needs of our students. We can't do that if we're looking like that. And, more effective too. Like, let's just kind of like have that, on the table as well. Like, there are ways we can meet our students' needs more effectively too.
Yeah, and I'll come up with the heinous, horrible thing to say. If I understand correctly, Cabrillo, the fact that we've got like K1, 2 at 25 students and the state average is, requirement is 30?
Well,
Limits.
okay,
And so, you'll get your chance to answer, let me finish. So I mean, I understand it's contractual and everything else, but understanding what variables we have to play with and what we could actually ask would be my question. And then, we have 4 small elementary school sites. My wonderment is it still most effective to do K through 5 at 4 different sites? Or if you did like a K1-3 and a 4-5 at a site, could you optimize services for a particular age and targeted? Anyways, I just want to think outside the box a little bit.
sometimes thinking outside the box is great, and sometimes thinking outside the box is a paradigm shift that I think a lot of us kind of like struggle with. So, for example, class configurations and grade configurations at different schools, I think is an intriguing idea. However, when one plays with that, if you had, let's say, K3 at one site and K5 at another site, it's all connected. And then there's traffic. So there's that. But back to the piece about class size real quickly. The contract actually doesn't speak so specifically about numbers per class size. It speaks about state limits. What is the natural thing that brings us to 25, average 25 to 1 or below 25 to 1 in the district is the funding rationale, which is the incentive from the state that says if you bring your K3 staffing to below 25 to 1, 24 to 1, then there is an incentive. The state gives you money. So there's an added thing there, which is it is very unpopular to go to higher class size, number one, with teachers and families alike. There's that. But the other thing is you would actually lose money. No, that you are, and it's good to ask these questions. I think a lot of people always say, well, if we had the ability to have 30 in a classroom, you'd save so much money. I think it depends on where you're situated and how that works. And actually what I know on first blush is that we would lose our classroom. What's the name of that grant, Dr.?
Size reduction?
Yeah, CSR, there's a CSR kind of bill. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just second the idea to just kind of look at creative ways that we could alleviate the strain in the classroom, and if it's maybe through independent study where that's a feasible option that's, again, good for students, that's number one. And sometimes independent study is the best option for students as well. So if that requires less resource in some cases, maybe, again, like Mary Beth said around concurrent enrollment, like kind of like opening that valve to give more options for students to that path could be another outlet. So I know.
I'll just say
anyway, we're not here to brainstorm what the cuts. So I just wanted to.
I'll just say, just to manage expectations. I don't think there's going to be a magic bullet. There's going to be cuts. Cuts will entail cuts to staff, and cuts to staff will entail cuts to programs and services. Some of those programs and services were delineated by the legislation and funding streams that we received because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many people feel like we're done with that. Certainly, many legislators feel like we're done with that, and they're stopping the spigot of that extra dollars. And so we will need to bring you some tough choices ahead about cutting staff that were tied to those dollars.
Jesus, I just wanted to ask you a question. I assume that the on average 2% step and column raise that all of our employees get every year are in those numbers. Is that correct?
We put the 2% step and column in those numbers.
Okay. So that's in all the out years as well. That's assuming.
Yes, that's
Okay,
a constant.
every year, on average, all our
2%.
employees are getting 2%. Okay, and I have a bone to pick with you about how you're wording
All the employees
things.
being total as a group. just
All
to be clear.
employees
Yeah.
as a group,
Yeah.
on average, making 2%. Did I say that wrong? But I have a bone to pick with you about how.
That's the
we're-
second time you've said it, Ms. Alexander.
We're saying, I'll say it again. Because I think when you were talking about a raise earlier, I think it's more transparent, it's not the right word, but transparent to the public who doesn't know about, the general public that don't have government jobs, that don't know about a step and column raise, that when we talk about a raise, we should be saying a raise to the salary schedule. Because it seems like we're not giving any raise at all otherwise. And I think it's a distinction that people don't understand, and I think it's a really important point.
I think it is a fair point, and I will say, just for the benefit of the public, that this has been a point that I've tried to parse and say, well, it doesn't really feel that way to educators. We kind of feel like we're on a salary schedule, and that's ubiquitous. That's kind of like the thing. That's what you sign up for. It's like the water we swim in. You don't even think it's there. But it is true for people who are not inside a government sector that an increase on a salary schedule of pay that results in a beginning teacher making $58,000 a year and an ending teacher making $110,000 a year, there is a built-in calculator that is a step and column. And I think that point, I will concede that point. I will acknowledge that point. I will not die on that hill.
Oh, yes, you will.
yeah.
We've been talking about this for a long time. Really? Okay, yeah, we have.
No, but Ms. Alexander, you are correct that the step and column is not logical that every employee gets an increase in their pay and salary every year. But sometimes there's a weight before you go over on that next column or step. There is the amount of education you have, like bachelor's plus 15 units, 30 units, master's plus 15 units plus 30 units. There's that kind of thing, and then there are years of service. When you go over on years of service, of course, this is why not senior, but long-standing employees make over $100,000 as teachers, and early teachers make shy of 60.
Well, and I do feel like there is a lot of people out there that think that all our employees this year will be making the same amount of money next year, and that's not true. They're all getting their step and column raise, which is on average 2%, times less.
Well, and just so that's very clear, and just so you can get a little piece of this, you and I haven't discussed this, but for example, when teachers are asked to return their return to work form by June 30th or May 30th, yeah, thank you. Teachers are asked to sort of like give us this paper, and you heard a commenter on it the other day in a board meeting saying that they got this thing, and people are asked to say, are you coming back? And I saw a form returned today and heard the bell at the front desk, went to go pick it up from a high school teacher and said, how can I help you? Oh, can you get this to HR? Sure. And when I looked at the form, there it was. Yes, I plan to return for the next year. And there's another box you check. Yes, I'm on the right salary schedule. So there is a request each year of every employee to not only indicate whether they're coming back so we can hire appropriately, right? because we'd like to know now if we need to hire because, but people have the right by state law to turn in when they want to turn in. But there is also a box there that checks where they've been asked, check the salary schedule. Are you on the right step of the salary schedule? But back to concede your point, Ms. Alexander, it is the case that everybody is on a step and column salary schedule except for contracted employees, and that over time those numbers increase. And of course, with seniority in the district, you go from starting salary of shy of $60,000 up to over $100,000 a year.
Right, and when we talk about a raise, we need to talk about a raise to the salary schedule. And we need to keep in mind that we have those numbers in there, right? But, of course, we want to raise the salary schedule too, because we are underpaid compared to other districts. But I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah, and just
To me too.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, when people ask, hey, why are there going to be fewer teachers than in the past? Because there are fewer kids. If there are fewer kids, you apply the logic of the contractual class size limit, you staff efficiently. If you didn't, you get into this mess.
And just thinking about that $7.8 million, if we were to assume, which this is going to be a high number, but it makes the math easy, that a fully loaded employee costs $200,000, which is going to be on the higher end, right? Then, and you divide those numbers, 7.8 million by 200,000, that's 39. So that doesn't mean tomorrow for next year we have to make 39 FTE changes or like 39 employees have to change, but just it gives us a ballpark of like how many years of employee time we would need to make change over the next 3 years. And it doesn't mean it's all going to be employee time, right? Like it's just a ballpark.
It's really a third of that, right? Because it's over 3.
It'll be a third of it if we did it next year for all 3 years. But that's like, that's why I said I didn't want to get into this because it could be that we cut $100,000 from 5 different things and that's like 500. Like clearly it's not going to be that, but just as we think about like the magnitude of $7.8 million over 3 years, that's like 40 people or 40 years of a person working full time equivalent.
Just let me remind you
makes
what
sense.
I said about there is not linearity here.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
Now, just to give the history again, remember we made all those cuts and savings and proposed that in December of 2019. You had to affirm a resolution where we listed all these things that we were going to cut and save. And then by October of the next year, we had gone to basic aid. And then all of a sudden, we were in a different picture and we were able to afford raises. Speaking of the linearity piece, again, I guess what you're saying is this isn't a racetrack, it's a roller coaster. And it depends on what your revenues are. But for those who have indicated that, hey, we don't have a budget problem this year, that's not what the first interim, second interim, or third interim showed. And for those who want to look in out years, the number is daunting. And again, what I've heard from some folks over time is that, well, Sean, you always predict budget crisis and then it never comes. And that's because the board accepts recommendations for cuts to programs and services and staffing, and in time you settle up and then more money comes in. I do think it is challenging for us now, for people who remember the recession of 2008 and remember the kind of cuts we took in districts after that. It gives one pause to think that we are coming in $30 billion, the fourth largest economy in the world, $30 billion, maybe that's a nothing burger. But the rest of the state is kind of freaking out. I can look at Ms. Cortez, I would imagine in your line of work, there will be cuts ahead. We happen to be sort of protected by this because of the Prop 98 guarantee. And so that's why you see Governor Newsom and the legislature and others sort of saying, oh, guess what? No, we got to have that nice COLA. So guess what? We're going to take it away from one-time funding that we already promised you that you already budgeted to pay for it, which is why I always call this a shell game. It may sound like it's unfair, or it may sound like I'm calling them carnival barkers or gamblers or cheats, but California funding is nuts for education. And it is nuts for us because we're a flipper district, because we have declining enrollment, and we're coming out of COVID-19. And as I've shown the data to anybody who will listen, and I'm glad I still have one listener in the audience who I've sent this data to and made this argument to, is, we do not get funded what San Mateo Union High School District gets funded per kid, because they have bigger parcel taxes and they've been basic aid for decades upon decades. And they have a 15 to 17% reserve for times like this.
And they have higher property taxes.
Much higher property taxes, and it is a high school district, so all their class sizes are 35. High school districts, if you look at the funding in the county, we are the lowest unified district, and yet we have a high school to run, which is very expensive. But again, remember, for a high school district, you have that efficiency because, hey, you're getting 35 kids potentially in a classroom. And you have economies of scale in big high school districts like San Mateo Union High, where there's over 2,000. I mean, I think it's important when we start playing these apples and oranges games. In Alameda, we had this issue all the time. People would say, look at Alameda High School. You always give them this number of employees, of teachers, and they always nail their master schedule. And look at Encinal High School. God bless you, Encinal and Alameda High School. I love you all. But why they can't make a schedule work? It's because they have 1,000 kids and Alameda High has 2,000 kids. Now that we have a high school that's 1,000 kids and meant to go lower, you don't have the economy of scale to be able to run everything at 35 to 1. It's an expensive proposition. The intermediate school here, I think, is going to be able to deliver maybe an employee less next year. The high school, we've asked them to do same. The elementary schools, last year we were able to cut, I think, one at Fairlawn View and one at another school. We will continue to look to staff as efficiently as possible so we don't have to make cuts to programs to certain students and families. And so we can maintain the raises and the 11% in raises we have given to staff over the last 3-4 years.
And just one last comment on your point about the high school districts and unified districts and the disparities, which we know are about threefold between the lowest funded and the highest funded in our county, which don't even take into account the differential student demographics, which would, if you were to factor that into, would skew it even more. But let's just say we have a lot of school districts in San Mateo County, and there's not really a high level of interest among the wealthier ones to take on the less wealthy ones. So let's just put that out there to be clear. Any scenario where a wealthy school district would be asked to take on a less wealthy school would not be well received.
I don't think it would be well received by this board. I don't think it would be well received by this community. And I don't think it'd be well received. I don't think I'm calling other superintendents anytime soon and saying, hey, will you take this school off our hands and pay them more money and have less money for the people who pay your taxes and pay your parcel taxes. I don't see it happening. Though I will say that I've heard this argument in the past also about charter schools. Hey, let the charter have it and everything will be fine. I would fight it tooth and nail to the end of days. And for that matter, when we talk about school closures, we've visited that before. I hear this conversation all the time. Close this school, close that school, everything will be fine. Not really. The teacher, I'll give an example, Kings Mountain. Those students would go to another school and the teachers would follow it because kids don't come in buckets of 25. They would go and you'd say, oh, we have to hire those 3 teachers. What would you say? Fairlawn View, same story. And then get into if I'm string pulling, why did this board choose to keep Fairlawn View open also and modernize it? Because I don't think, now that we've seen the demographers report, I don't think that if we're going to have a boost in elementary enrollment coming up, I don't think you can afford to put another 200 students at El Granada, plus there's going to be maybe an increase in public school. I mean, that's the thing too that I think people should remember. Look, this has been a long history, yeah? And this is an underfunded district, and it is unfair. And basic aid, as far as I'm concerned, is wrong. And the state funding since Prop 13 is criminal, and it is completely unfair, and there's a lack of parity in our districts locally. And I heard one speaker, last board meeting say, how can we pay the same as Patterson? Guess what? It's probably because we get funded the same as Patterson. Nothing against Patterson, lower cost of living, but that's how the cookie crumbles, right? But I will say it is unfair, but we made a decision to keep schools open, and I just don't think that cutting schools or abdicating our responsibilities. I remember this 3.5 years ago. People said, well, just let the county take us over and we'll get everything we need. It doesn't work that way. If the county takes over, if we can't handle our fiduciary responsibility and make the cuts now that we have to make because of decisions we've made and situations that are outside of our control, then what happens is the county comes in, the state comes in, and there is no board and they make the decisions. Talk about anti-democratic. So, look, I think this is a wake-up call. Of course, we wanted to have this conversation. Of course, we wanted as many people as possible to hear it. Because I remember 3.5 years ago, and since then, over and over, particular individuals saying there never was a budget crisis. Well, there wasn't once we flipped to basic aid and we had enough money to bring raises, but there was before. We got a letter from the county say we were a letter of lack of going concern. We were a lack of going concern, which is says you can't make ends meet. And that's what that table says again.
And that's what their other letter said again. And that's what they want to tell us again in that meeting we're trying to schedule with them.
We will be
Hopefully for
scheduling
next
another
week.
meeting. They will be our critical friends. They will come.
And the fact that they want me there?
Not good. Not good. So, look, the board and the superintendent have a fiduciary duty. It's not always a popularity contest. Last year, it sure was popular for us to give raises the way we gave them and to finally be done with old family business and go through mediation and to give. And of course we want to do it. Everybody deserves to make more money. This is a very expensive place to live. But our income is less than our expenses. And it's not copacetic. It won't fly. So we're back in that space. And for all those who want to say, no, there's no problem here, you're wrong. There's a problem here. It's the way that this district is situated for funding. It is a lack of local funding and county funding and state funding. We are funded disparately, and that's why we pay disparately. And when we try to pay more and can't afford it, that means we have cuts coming ahead. I wish it were different. But of course, Dr. Contreras is going to recommend approval of a negative budget. It is with great sadness and mortification and embarrassment that we recommend it.
One last thing that I would want to refer to. The exercise that I shared with you, that we were saying, here, let's find $2.1 million. This should help us get there. The vulnerability of not having reserves really puts us in a place where simple storms can move us out of where we need to be.
And we've talked about it, I totally agree, it would be lovely to have that buffer, but the reality is, it's two ends against the middle. And as much as we would like to have the reserves, our teachers do deserve pay. And so I think that's what we've seen. Yes, the board officially said that was a goal, but at the end of the day, this board's going to do as much as it can for the teachers. I just want to name it.
I'm glad you are naming it because it is just to remind everybody, the board approved a over 5% raise to employees last year and a $2,000 bonus to every employee. The board did that knowing,
Raised to the salary schedule.
raise to the salary schedule, thank you, on top of the salary schedule increments. The board approved that because they did believe, as you just said, Ms. Hines, that the teachers deserve it. We all agreed with that. But now, what's the chicken comes home to roost or whatever?
This is just a quick clarifying question about the money that you said, the journaling thing that you said about earlier, or you talked about earlier. Like, so basically, again, when we're putting ongoing expenses towards one-time funds, that's a red flag too. That's kind of like short-term fix, that's gonna come home to roost too at some point when those one-time funds run out.
It is true that way, but what we did is journal current expenditures of services that we're already providing. And so that gives us, because those dollars were good until 2028, we can serve as a buffer. We used them as a buffer to make sure that we could then reinvent ourselves and think of ourselves while using those.
So it buys us some time.
Right.
One other thing to think about is if we could figure out the narrative and the story to explain the funds that come to the Bay Area and turn into excess education revenue and get paid out to municipalities instead of coming to schools, we can't keep eating ourselves. We can't keep trying to solve it at every single school district. So there is the Bay Area that perhaps our business executives could help frame that story a little better. I mean, we keep calling our assemblymen and our senators who are really trying to balance a lot of different things, but that's one piece. At the end of the day, unless we have a locality index for the Bay Area and a set salary schedule for the state, I don't think we're going to see equity in the state.
I would tend to agree with you, and you've mentioned this many times, Ms. Hines, over the years, and it came home to me as an aha moment 2 weeks ago when we were celebrating the 10th year of local control funding formula, and Mike Kirst was talking about that, and he argued for this very thing 10 years ago when we were starting, 10 years ago, 20 years? 10 years.
10 years ago, 2013, 14.
Yeah, so 2013, he argued for this, a cost of living index for parts of the state. The rub in that, the fly in the ointment on that, of course, is that many people in Sacramento look at San Mateo County because of the number of basic aid districts and because of the great wealth in property and businesses. South San Francisco, Genentech, you name it, right? They look at Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and they say, cry me a river. There's so many districts that are doing just fine, thank you so much. It really is Pacifica and Cabrillo, ironically Burlingame, but Burlingame's an elementary district. It's easier to run. Unified district, we are the lowest fund unified district in the county. And remember, when folks say, well, Pescadero pays more, nothing against La Honda Pescadero, God bless them, they make twice as much money per pupil than we do when you cut it that way. So Pacifica and Cabrillo Unified. And what's different about Pacifica and Cabrillo Unified too is our health benefits, right? Pacifica has full family. We have full family for employees hired before 2011. That's one other thing that is sort of like, you know, when I talk to younger employees hired after 2011, sometimes they say, oh, we're a two-tier system. Sounds terrible, but it is true. They have the employees covered and their families are covered for the folks hired before 2011. That is another cost, and I provided you those costs, but again, we probably should bring those costs to the public so everybody could see that too. It's always uncomfortable because these are negotiable items. They're enshrined in contract. But I guess, you know, at this point, just to manage expectations, I think we're going to be showing where the money's spent. And it won't be talking story back and forth in a board meeting. It'll be on paper.
Lots of opportunities for more supplemental funding. I do think the idea of the just from the buzz that I hear as well in Sacramento, which I'll be going to again on Friday again for Legislative Advocacy Committee, or Legislative Committee for CSBA. Though that the regional cost of living adjustment is untenable for the reasons that you stated, and for the recognition that there are like dire high needs, which is, you know, elsewhere in the state, particularly in LA County, where that's why we see that equity multiplier aspect of the governor's proposal that the legislature supported as well. There are dire needs out there for sure. You know, and also I just want to highlight another federal area of funding challenge, which is around special education, where the federal government by law is mandated to support school districts at a 40% rate of costs, meaning they are legally required to provide districts with 40% of the cost of their special education. And they're doing so on average around 17% a year. So correct me if I'm wrong, Jesus, but it would seem that given we're spending around $6 million a year
About $6 million.
on special education, that's a difference of like $1 to $2 million per year, each year that we're not getting, that we are like federally guaranteed, but it just somehow never makes it into the federal budget, which is like mind-numbing. I have shared that information really recently. I spoke about it with Congresswoman Anna Hsu when she was at our San Mateo County School Boards Association Awards night a couple weeks ago. I spoke about it with Congressman Mullins' staffer who was there as well, and I've sent them both follow-ups with details about the bills that are in the House and in the Senate and all the support that they have, bipartisan. So I don't hold my breath on anything happening in Congress right now because they finally they don't quite have their heads around the debt ceiling resolution yet. There are, to your point, like big fish to fry out there, but you know, I think that's something that we've got to also keep in mind, that that's $1 to $2 million encroaching on our general fund each year. And it's not to say that those needs, like, that we need to do that. Like, that's legally required and the right thing to do for our students. But, you know, another way that our general fund, those unrestricted dollars, poof, like another couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there. We sure could use some more help.
But to that point though, like you were saying, you know, sometimes employees are they can make their money worth, because we're going to start billing. Martha gave in her presentation last meeting that we're going to start trying to bill Medicaid for a lot more of that stuff. So like that's an employee thing that's paying for itself. So I think, you know, you're working on things like that, I know, and I think it's great.
That is a bright spot if the state is actually able to bring those dollars to bear from the community to schools and target us, and that helps us save. But clearly, from what we're describing, there are a bunch of unfunded mandates. I mean, meals, universal meals, that's a signature thing for the governor. He wants universal meals for everybody, breakfast and lunch. Everybody depends on it, yada, 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 yada. It's an unfunded mandate. The contract costs us more money. They pay us some money, but it's not really completely funded.
They give us some more money, but the reimbursement is different.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, there's all kinds of promises made by politicians in their sound bites, and again, nothing against politicians, but at the end of the day, for those who are watching the bouncing ball, there is a potential of a recession. The Legislative Analyst's Office is saying that this budget is not worth the paper it's written on. They are taking away funding that was promised us to make up for their promise of a COLA. And you know what? We're not going to have satisfying answers for you, period, full stop, probably ever. Honestly, we are going to try to make ends meet, but it's going to mean cuts to programs and services and staff, period. And doing things differently because of things that are outside of our control. Or it's going to entail raising more local revenue through a parcel tax or a replacement parcel tax. Or it's going to mean all of a sudden that poof, a miracle happens and that assessment tracker that we saw before at 6.55% actually materializes. but we've kind of run the numbers. Even if it does, we're still in this problem. We've been in a deficit spending problem for years. We've kept up with the Joneses. Every time we get money, we bankrupt ourselves. Here we go again. You know, there's work to do. It's a challenge. Dr. Contreras, God bless him, he always tells me, oh, it's going to be challenging times. I can get a little blue about it. And I feel a great amount of responsibility for it. And on the other hand, I kind of feel like this is where we're at. So we have to make do with what we've got, and there'll be some hard decisions ahead. But a simple decision for you, hopefully today, is to approve this as a negative. We recommend the approval of a negative budget so we can invite FCMET and the County Office of Education and all of us to begin looking at the painful task of getting our budget back in arrears.
Any further comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll go to vote.
Thank you. This is a regular call, a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. It passes 5-0.
Okay. Thank you. I wish it were different.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda for tonight is item 3B, approval of lease-leaseback contract with Rodan Builders Incorporated for the El Granada Modernization Project.
We're changing fund. We left Fund 1. We're going to Fund 21. In Fund 21, we have the bond, that's our bond program. And we have the bonds that we have, the community has provided us to modernize our schools. We brought to you a architect firm and a contractor for Fairlawn View. Now we're bringing you for approval the lease-leaseback contract for the contractor at El Granada. And that is exactly the same. We will be bringing to you after this moment, or after you approve it. If you approve it tonight, we start working with them and we start coming back and forth. They will start then looking into getting a price that it is going to be a guaranteed price for the project that we have out there. And because of that, as we go into this process, I told Dr. McPetrich that I was going to be asking to have a board meeting, another special board meeting, sometime in July. So we're looking at the week of the 17th of July or the following week. So let's just...
So first, let me start on that. Some of our board members, I think, will be on a much deserved vacation and will be unable to meet. We will look at figuring out if we can get a quorum to do that, but we may need to do that. Second of all, I just want to bring this idea of the lease-leaseback. Lease-leaseback was recently in the courts. I think it was about Fresno, and they had a long-standing case that eventually went up to the Supreme Court. Look, I remember back in my last district, lease-leaseback came under scrutiny, and there were some legal concerns about it. What I want to also say is that this now has been combed over by our attorneys after that Supreme Court decision to make sure that we are not getting took and that we are able to do this in a legal way that will not bear scrutiny. So I want to thank Dr. Contreras for working with those lawyers. I know Rosie and I were like, when is it going to be done? When is it going to be done? But thank you for doing that. And we are satisfied that Rodan Builders was chosen. They met the criteria, your bidding criteria for recommendation. I understand from the memo that they were also a local firm, and that also provided us some feeling that they would be responsible for their work and accountable for their work and known for their work. And we think that this lease-leaseback contract is a good one, but there will be more work ahead, and we will hope that we can collect a quorum together, or if it's in July, have people able to Zoom in, I guess, or call in,
We need to have a quorum in
in
present.
situ with the new laws.
Yeah,
That's a thought of a need, but I'll keep you posted.
Do you have questions about the lease-leaseback structure and what it means and why it was a legal issue?
No, it's because we discussed it all last time.
That's right.
So I guess it's for approval, so we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you, Kimberly.
Questions and comments? I don't really have any because it's pretty straightforward and almost exactly like the one we did last time.
Same process.
Yeah, same process, same basic flow, different school, different contractor, but pretty much otherwise all the same.
Yes.
So it looks good to me.
Ready to vote? Okay, this is a resolution, so we require roll call. Sophia,
Aye.
Kimberly,
Aye.
Carmen, Lisette, Mary Beth.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesus.
Thank you, Dr. Contreras.
And so since this is a special meeting, we don't have all the usual stuff at the end about future board meetings and stuff. We just have item 4, adjournment. So I guess we just need a motion to adjourn in second and we vote.
So moved.
Thank you, Lisette. Thank you, Carmen. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.